I had a math teacher in the 10th grade who once said to me, "Chase, if you were a computer, you'd have a very large hard drive, but a very slow processor." She was very Cajun, straight out of the Louisiana swamps, hence the terrible accent. At the time, it seemed like a really mean thing to say, but given experiences later in life, I now reflect back on it as not only very accurate, but also pretty insightful. Because as time's gone by, I've come to recognize that having a slow processor isn't necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't mean I'm stupid, but just that my brain is analyzing so much information at once that it takes me longer than your average person to sift through it all. And because it's scanning and retaining such a vast amount of data, I tend to come to conclusions and look at the world in a way that's, well, a little bit different. Maybe you're the same way, and if you are, you might have a lot in common with Pokemon's derpiest boy, Slowpoke. Why is that, you ask? Well, let's take a look. Welcome to the first entry in a new recurring series that I'm calling Dex Dive. In these videos, we'll take an in-depth look at one particular Pokemon, using things like their Pokedex entries and in-game lore as reference points to hopefully gain a new appreciation for their contributions to the franchise. So if you're a fellow Pokemaniac that enjoys nerding out about aspects of the series that goes far beyond what's socially acceptable, welcome home. I invite you to take a seat, crack a cold one, and join me for this in-depth look at a beloved yet misunderstood Pokemon that I think a lot of us can relate to. Slowpoke, affectionately classified by the Pokedex as the Dopey Pokémon, is Pocket Monster number 79, coming in right after Ponyta and Rapidash. Interesting, isn't it? One of Kanto's fastest Pokemon and a fire type comes in right before a water type who also happens to be one of the slowest Pokemon. Coincidence? I think not. But actually, Rapidash isn't as fast as you might think. It's not even in the top 10 when it comes to the original 151. And it's actually outsped? And it's actually outranked by Electrode, Mewtwo, Aerodactyl, Jolteon, Alakazam, Dugtrio, Persian, Tauros, Gengar, Dodrio, Raichu, and Starmie. Like, what the heck?
You gotta be quicker than that, buddy.
Anyway, while Rapidash isn't quite as fast as you might assume, Slowpoke is the opposite. Every bit as slow as you might expect. Can you guess where it ranks? Dead last. That's right, true to its name, Game Freak stuck this derpy dude, or dudette, I guess, right at the back of the pack, with an absolutely abysmal base speed stat of 15. Yeah, literally every other single Pokemon in the entire first generation is faster, meaning that if you've ever used Slowpoke in a playthrough, it's probably never moved first, like ever. Instead, it's sat there, just reacting to everything around it and everything that happens to it, including getting punched in the face. With a very delayed reaction time. Which brings us to its Pokedex entries, which mention this. In red and blue, Slowpoke's Pokedex entry is as follows. Incredibly slow and dopey. It takes 5 seconds for it to feel pain when under attack. Here's the first way that I personally relate to Slowpoke. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you might have picked up on the fact by now that I'm autistic.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
And it wasn't until very late in life, and pretty recently really, that I had this realization and received a formal diagnosis. Oh, the irony. But if you're also neurodivergent or know someone who is, then you're probably aware that difficulties with what's called interoception, or your awareness of your body's own internal signals, comes with the territory. For example, I can go for pretty long periods without feeling hunger at all. And by the time I do, I'm usually about ready to pass out. The same is true even for things like thirst and temperature, which has led to me almost passing out when mowing the grass, more times than I'm willing to admit. But this isn't dopiness, in contrast to Slowpoke's Dex entry. It has nothing to do with intelligence, but rather just a difference in the brain's connections. So for everybody that told me I'm smart but lack common sense, you can pound sand. Well, actually, you're kinda right. In a way. Anyway, Slowpoke has the same problem. But is it a problem? I'm not convinced that it is. Honestly, having a delayed reaction to fatigue and even pain can be incredibly useful, like in endurance sports, for example. It's why I've always had an unusual proficiency for long distance running.
Like Forrest Gump. Except, I am not an idiot.
Even though I've got the hand-eye coordination of a baby giraffe rig who took too much ZQuil. And if you look at Slowpoke's dex entry in yellow, there's another connection. Incredibly slow and sluggish, it's quite content to loll about without worrying about the time. Having a differently wired brain also often means having what's called time blindness, which is a distorted or complete lack of the perception of the passing of time. In my case, I can go hours and hours and then suddenly realize that the entire day has passed me by and that I missed that dentist appointment. Again. Nobody needs to go to the dentist every 6 months anyway, okay? It's a scam.
Hello, I like money.
But clearly, Slowpoke's in the same boat. Like me, it tends to get lost in what it's doing. But what is it that Slowpoke is so engrossed in? Further dex entries shed some light. In Stadium, which yeah, has dex entries, who knew, it says, a dopey Pokemon that remains in a daze except when fishing with its tail. Awake or asleep, there's little difference. In a daze, except when fishing with its tail. In other words, there's not a whole lot that Slowpoke's interested in, except for the subjects that it is interested in, and for those things, it's not in its usual daze. Sound familiar? And here's where things get cool. Slowpoke's not just interested in fishing, it's also good at it. Its dex entry in Fire Red, which was actually its original Japanese entry in Red and Green, says this. It is always vacantly lost in thought, but no one knows what it's thinking about. It is good at fishing with its tail. So Slowpoke's tendency to zone out might actually just be it tuning out everything around it in order to zone in on the one area in which it excels. Now with that said, we also have to account for Emerald's dex entry, which is just a shortened version of the entry used in Ruby and Sapphire. It catches prey by dipping its tail in water at the side of a river, but it often forgets what it's doing and spends entire days just loafing at water's edge. To me, this is also very relatable. If you're like me, you might find that regulating your attention or the ability to filter out extraneous stimuli to focus on that one thing that you need or want to do is like balancing a Wailord on a razor's edge. It's a delicate balancing act. At times, you can get yourself in the zone. At others, it just ain't happening. And like Slowpoke, even when you get started, sometimes it can be hard to follow through. In Gen 2, Slowpoke's dex entries shift to focus on how it fishes, with its apparently delicious tail. In Gold, it lazes vacantly near water. If something bites its tail, it won't even notice for a whole day. Have you ever been good at something or found success and didn't recognize it at the time, only to later realize that, wow, yeah, most people can't do that? Missed that cue, didn't we, buddy? In Silver, a sweet sap leaks from its tail's tip. Although not nutritious, the tail is pleasant to chew on. In Crystal, it is always so absent-minded that it won't react, even if its flavorful tail is bitten. And Stadium 2 also has dex entries, but it just reuses those from the Gen 1 and Gen 2 games. So again, rather than being slow or dopey in the sense of being unintelligent, Slowpoke is just wired differently, to the point that it's actually more competent than average at a particular subject, despite its struggle to keep itself on task. But that absent-mindedness has an unfortunate side effect: being taken advantage of. If you've played the Gen 2 games on the Game Boy Color or the Gen 4 remakes of Heart Gold and Soul Silver on the DS, then you know where this is going. Gen 2's plot includes the return of Team Rocket, which disbanded after getting whooped up on by an 11-year-old 3 years prior. In Gold, Silver, and Crystal, your first confrontation with this evil team's comeback is just outside of Azalea Town at none other than Slowpoke Well. The sign posted next to the well says, Slowpoke Well, also known as the Rainmaker Well. Locals believe that a Slowpoke's yawn summons the rain. Records show that a Slowpoke's yawn ended a drought 400 years ago. A yawn bringing rain. Is it just a local legend? More on that later. In Azalea Town, this well is a fixture of the local culture, being the home of the Pokemon that probably saved their lives and livelihood, Slowpoke. Yeah, this dopey dude is actually heroic. But when you first arrive to this sleepy little village on the edge of the forest, you notice some shady looking characters in black skulking around. Team Rocket grunts. They're to pull their latest job of cutting off the tails of the Slowpoke and selling them for a profit. How's that for a plot device in a children's game? The grunt blocking the entrance to Bugsy's gym says this: do you know about Slowpoke tail? I heard it's tasty. Okay, Jeffrey. And by the way, these psychos are doing this absolutely shamelessly, with one grunt in the well saying this: "Sure, we've been hacking the tails off Slowpoke and selling them. Everything we do is for profit. That's right, we're Team Rocket and we'll do anything for money." You know what's funny, in that line you could replace Team Rocket with really any multinational corporation and it would still make sense. Meanwhile, you have NPC dialogue mentioning that all the Slowpoke have disappeared from town. Yeah, that's because they've all been rounded up to be mutilated by a bunch of greed-crazed sociopaths. Anyway, maybe you know the rest. Thankfully, with the help of Kurt, the crotchety apricorn ball crafter, you enter the well, defeat Team Rocket, and the Slowpoke return to town to literally heal from the trauma, because their tails can grow back. One grunt in the well references this by saying, "Slowpoke tails grow back fast. What's wrong with selling them?" Gee, I don't know, maybe because it's immoral? But interestingly, it seems like Slowpoke's ability to regenerate its appetizing built-in fishing rod isn't revisited again until Sun and Moon in Gen 7. Its Dex entry in Sun says, "Its long tail often breaks off. It doesn't really feel any pain though, and the tail grows back, so Slowpoke isn't particularly bothered." And in Moon, prepare yourself for this: Alolan home cooking involves drying Slowpoke tails and then simmering them into a salty stew. So, it turns out Team Rocket weren't the only ones harvesting this poor Pokemon's extremities and preparing them for human consumption. What is wrong with you people?
Who are you people?
What kind of world do we even live in where this kind of thing can happen?
What kind of place is this?
But, to give the good folks of Alola the benefit of the doubt, the Dex entry doesn't say that they're actually cutting the tails off themselves. And the Dex entry in Ultramoon actually backs this up. Although their tails, which fall off naturally, can easily be found lying around, they're a precious ingredient for cooking. Phew, that was a close one. So in the case of the Alola region at least, it seems like the people there had a respect for Slowpoke and had more of a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship going on. Slowpoke's nasty old tails start piling up, hula dancing grandmas gather them up, make some stew. Everybody wins. Thankfully, the Alolan people benefit from Slowpoke's unusual abilities in the right way. Rather than abusing the fact that their tails are tasty fishing lures, they seem to let nature run its course and collect them only after they've fallen off by themselves. In other words, they let Slowpoke be Slowpoke, as it uses its tail for the intended purpose of fishing rather than treating it like a commodity. In this way, Slowpoke for me is a poignant symbol of our relationships with other people and how easy it can be to be treated like a novelty, to be used for someone else's gain, even without realizing it. And unfortunately, this is a nearly universal experience of neurodivergent individuals. Because when you pair a spiky skill set and the ability to hyper-focus with the tendency to miss social cues, you have a recipe for exploitation. That's why it's so important to make sure relationships are built on an appreciation of who you are and a respect for boundaries. But in the case of Slowpoke, what if I told you that that respect goes as far as reverence, like in the religious sense? So this is interesting. In a cool tie-in to the Gen 2 games, the Dex entry in Ultra Sun says this: "There are some places where Slowpoke is worshipped because of a long-standing belief that whenever Slowpoke yawns, it rains." Now, whether this is referencing the people in Azalea Town or some other location in Alola, I don't know. But this is fascinating for a few reasons. First of all, it shows that for at least some people in the Pokemon world, Slowpoke is not only highly regarded, but revered as deity. So for all you fellow misfits that were made to believe you're slow, there's a population out there somewhere that's just waiting to kneel before our greatness. That reminds me of that Weird Al song, Genius in France, where he's like a dumb loser in the US, but then he realizes the French regard him as basically godlike. Off topic, I know, but where the Weird Al fans at? Anyway, if you're thinking, okay, so that's one legend from one game and one Dex entry, what's the big deal? Maybe Slowpoke can make it rain. And not that kind, the literal kind. The big deal is how important rain is. And that may seem obvious, but the statistics are pretty amazing. In the United States alone, from 1980 to 2024, drought was responsible for more than 4,658 deaths, or about 100 per year on average. That's about as many as all deaths caused by flooding, freezes, severe storms, wildfires, and winter storms combined. In fact, the only other kind of disaster that's more deadly is tropical cyclones or hurricanes. And globally, the impact is of course even worse, with droughts representing just 15% of natural disasters, but taking the largest human toll at 650,000 deaths from 1970 to 2019. So yeah, lack of rain is a major problem, and much more destructive in the long run than too much rain. If there was any question as to whether a rampaging Groudon or Kyogre would be worse, I think now we know. But this shows just how valuable Slowpoke is in its ability to make rain. Without it, we know of at least one town in the Johto region that would have gotten the air fryer treatment. And with Ilex Forest right next door, it might not be too much of a stretch to say that Slowpoke single-handedly saved a certain time-traveling, onion-headed mythical from ending up served as an appetizer at the Outback Steakhouse.
For a limited time, only at Outback Steakhouse.
And finally, on this subject of precipitation, if you've played Pokopia, then you know that Slowpoke's role as a rainmaker takes center stage for a big portion of the game's plot, with the level of humidity being critically important to improving the environment and thereby repopulating a drought-ravaged and post-apocalyptic Kanto with a variety of Pokemon species. And actually the entire world, really. Because as seen from the records left behind by humans throughout Pokopia, it wasn't just a dried out Kanto they were fleeing from, but really the entire planet. I bet when you started watching this video, you didn't think you were going to hear about Slowpoke literally saving the world. Yep. Clearly, there's more to this Pokemon than just being pink and dumb, unlike some other fictional characters. Rather than just being a derpy dingus with a tantalizing tail, Slowpoke is more than that. And it's also reflected in its typing of water and psychic. If Slowpoke were just a water type, the story might end there, but it's not. And to me, despite even Bulbapedia asserting that Slowpoke has a notoriously dim intellect, its secondary typing is proof of its overlooked potential and its underappreciated mystical abilities. In red, blue, and yellow, Slowpoke comes standard with the basic psychic attack, Confusion. And unlike Psyduck and Golduck, which are associated with psychic abilities, especially in the anime, Slowpoke's getting stab on it. Because Psyduck and Golduck are just water types, which is weird, really. But it proves my point. Whereas Psyduck is much more widely recognized for its psychic abilities, it's not even actually a psychic type. And while it does gain access to much better psychic moves in later generations, Confusion is the only psychic move it learns when leveling up in Gen 1, and the same goes for Golduck. Clearly, as we see in Pokedex entries and in the anime, Psyduck is really the one that's aloof when it comes to its powers and the world around it. Its use of psychic attacks are totally haphazard and unintentional, kinda like my approach to life. Slowpoke, on the other hand, I think it knows what it's doing, even if people don't recognize it. This puts its Fire Red Dex entry, which we looked at earlier, in a new light. It is always vacantly lost in thought, but no one knows what it is thinking about. Hopefully, at this point, you might have an inkling of what Slowpoke could be pondering. To me, it's pretty clear. Far from just fishing for food or the eventual shelter to ensure its evolution, I think Slowpoke is contemplating the fate of its planet, its role in the universe. Whether Cinnamon Toast or French Toast Crunch is the superior cereal. You know, important intellectual stuff. Well, I hope that this helps shed some light on or inspire some new appreciation for a Pokemon that's been written off as merely dopey for far too long, even though it's designated as such. Because ultimately, the Pokedex in any game is written from a human perspective. Like real-world encyclopedias or diagnostic manuals, it's really just an attempt to describe creatures that may have more going on beneath the surface than what's immediately observable. Odds are that there's not one label or category that you fit neatly into, and it's likely that few people, if any, have ever seen or appreciate the real you. If that's the case, you're not alone. Because now you have someone to relate to. Their name is Slowpoke, and they want to be your friend. So, what do you think? Obviously, there's a lot more to Slowpoke that I didn't mention here, so feel free to share your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, be sure to let me know, and leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Until next time, thanks again guys, and I'll see you in the next one. But a very slow processor.